I do appreciate the transparency that Admiral Cooper is having about what the U.S. is doing in Iran. But that said, I think we've already seen these announcements of various attacks to degrade Iranian capabilities. But that doesn't necessarily mean that these capabilities are off the table. There's also a real focus right now on Iran's conventional capabilities. Its conventional navy, its anti-ship cruise missiles, its command and control architecture. And while that is all well and good, Iran can do a lot with very little. It can threaten the Strait of Hormuz with drones. It doesn't need to have some of its large warships. It can use IRGC fast boats. There are so many different ways that Iran can still threaten the Strait of Hormuz that are more asymmetric. And some of these attacks will most certainly degrade Iranian capabilities, but it doesn't take them out entirely. And that, I think, is where we maybe have some problems with the theory of victory that's being put forward by U.S. Central Command, the Pentagon, and, frankly, President Donald Trump.
Becca, you mentioned transparency, and it's nice to hear updates on the operations. But in previous administrations, Republican and Democrat, this would have been a press conference. Why wasn't this a press conference? And can we get your take on this court ruling that those Pentagon passes were taken away, that the parameters by which you could retract a Pentagon pass were not legal?
I mean, it would have been a press conference, and in fairness, we have had Pentagon press conferences pretty routinely since the start of the war with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane.
Yeah.
However, that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's in the room, right? We're all watching from afar quite often because there is this new Pentagon press corps. So there is transparency, but it's so focused on all of these tactical successes as opposed to focusing on the bigger picture and strategic success. There's also the question of why hasn't there been any open door congressional hearings about this? That's definitely something we would have seen in previous administrations.
And something we've heard from Republicans about, that if they were to authorize this $200 billion package, they would want to see those hearings. I think Senator Kennedy said that in remarks yesterday. Becca, I want to ask you about your most recent piece. You're writing about kind of the military tack that this president has taken or favored. That is favoring air power, special operation forces. You use a term that candidly I love, which is Gucci high-end long-range equipment. What he's experiencing now, though, is the degree to which that works in kind of a longer-term scenario here. You write that violence wielded from afar can only accomplish so much. I'd love for you to talk about that lesson learned, especially as we've been talking about over the course of this morning. The president is clearly thinking about the prospect of going to Karg Island and trying to take that very critical part of Iran's oil infrastructure.
Part of Trump's way of warfare has been this idea of war without entanglement, the idea of no boots on the ground, no big coalitions of the willing, no need to actually be there, just use coercive force in any way that you can from a distance. But when you try and do that without clear objectives, oftentimes you find that it doesn't work. And so Trump has found himself having these strikes and then potential restrikes. And I think looking at the Iran war, we can even think of this as a restrike. Trump went in during June of last year for Operation Midnight Hammer. It didn't actually achieve what he set out for it to achieve. So we find ourselves mired in conflict yet again. And I think with this current war going on much longer than Trump intended, there's the potential for ground force deployment. As you said, we've seen various Marine units get called up. And at this juncture in time, it potentially risks becoming one of the very forever wars that Trump campaigned against. And that just shows the limits of his approach to warfare.
And that's the irony here, especially as he talks about wrapping up this operation and possibly looking at others, including Cuba. I want to read a little bit more from your piece. You say Donald Trump believes America can fight wars without becoming trapped in them, yet this more muscular military vision rarely produces the political outcomes he desires. One of the other things we've been discussing is the fact, and you just mentioned it, when you're coming in hard and hot with these airstrikes, this works for him in Venezuela. It is not going to work everywhere, and it may not work like that in Iran. And I think it seems the president is now trying to get his hands around what he wants to do here. Can he achieve his objectives, frankly, without putting boots on the ground?
The question is, what are his objectives? It's been a bit vacillating. It's been all over the place. And so a lot of what we've actually heard from the president and from folks who are in support of his aims have really focused once again on these tactical and operational objectives, not a broader strategic picture. And that is something that makes it really difficult to disentangle yourself, and it makes it really difficult to try and achieve aims when you keep on just slapping more and more tactical objectives onto something. And that's the risk where we might actually see some of these ground forces. And it's also the risk that I think Trump has seen in this current term, where he's launched over 9,000 strikes all around the globe, not only the Middle East.
Very quickly here, you write about the splendid isolation he seems to find himself in. We've got about 30 seconds. I apologize for that. But this is a moment when he's trying to get allies to help him out, and yet he finds himself increasingly alone and isolated, only with Israel. Yes, an ally, but with no more than that.
Yeah, I think Trump thought that he could essentially do it alone with one model ally who could come in and provide some additional firepower. And I think now he's finding that he needs allies. Look at his call for a request for the Strait of Hormuz. Once you eschew allies, they're not necessarily going to come to your aid just because you ask for it after the fact.
What's that thing going around on social? If you want a village, you got to be a villager. I guess that applies to diplomacy, too.